Facebook Live is also on. Or?
I will do that. Shubhro, I'm doing it on the page, right? Shubhro?
Yes.
I still cannot do it on the page, I think, because I don't manage the page. So I have to do it on the group. Shubhro?
Okay. So
No.
let me see. Let me check. Give me a minute.
Yeah, because
But you are doing it from Hill's account, so I think you should be able to do live from page also, if I'm not mistaken.
let me see. No, it is only showing the 3 pages I manage. Because Facebook is not logged in, is logged in with my login credentials, na? So I will
So
do it
you
on the group. Okay.
okay? You do it on the group.
Mm. Okay, Facebook is starting. I will admit all. Now we have 34 and 23 waiting in the meeting. Views joined. Oh, wow. So I'll go on mute.
Shall we start? Shall we start?
Okay. Yeah, sure, we can start because although 25 are waiting and joining in, but they will take some time, I guess, because of their issues.
Okay, fine.
We already have 40 in the meeting.
Yes, okay. So all of you who have joined in, a very warm welcome to all of you from HEAL. Today we are hosting the next session on our webinar series, Women in Conservation. And I'm very glad to introduce Iravati Mazgaonkar. She has been working on wolves in the Karnataka, Maharashtra landscape. She completed her master's in wildlife biology and conservation from National Center for Biological Sciences, Bangalore, and is currently doing her PhD from Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment. So Ira, a very warm welcome to you and over to you.
Hello. Thank you, Tiasha. So I shall share my screen. Just let me know if you can see it. I'm audible, right?
You are audible. Maybe try to speak up a little bit more and it will be more clear.
Okay. All right. Okay. Is it visible? My screen? Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining this session. Tiasha already introduced me. So I guess I'll just directly go on to the presentation. So, maybe some of you are familiar with some of these debates surrounding savannahs and wolves and semi-arid ecosystems. So in that case, probably some part of the presentation will be a repeat. So, sorry about that. So I have very less photos of myself. I have very less photos of myself. So I firstly, maybe some of you are familiar with some of these debates surrounding savannas and wolves and semi-arid ecosystems. So in that case, probably some part of the presentation will be a repeat. So sorry about that. And I've also very freely used a lot of photographs from multiple people, and I've tried to acknowledge all of them as much as possible. So I have very less photos of myself. Yeah, so all right. So The talk today is going to revolve around particular kinds of landscapes and ecosystems, which are mostly non-charismatic. So what I mean by this is they are rarely discussed about, especially outside the wildlife conservation or research circles. So generally citizens are less aware of these landscapes. So they are definitely not tropical dense forests like you see in these photographs, where people believe all the wilderness lies. Neither are they the sandy deserts where all these different looking species are present.
Ira,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I think you have to be a bit louder because a lot of people are saying not being able to hear.
Oh.
Okay, sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. Is this better?
yeah, yeah. Okay, you can
All
shout
right.
as much as you
Okay.
want.
Yeah, I'll need to shout. Okay. So, so the kind of ecosystems and landscapes that I'm going to be talking about or sharing my experiences from somewhat look like this. They're called savanna ecosystems, and they they are present in different forms all throughout the world. In fact, these ecosystems form about 20% of the land area of this globe, which is a huge chunk of the land mass. So these four photographs are all from India. The top left is from Andhra Pradesh in southeastern India, from Rolapadu Wildlife Sanctuary. The right one on the top is in Gujarat, close to Kutch, and that's a Nilgai. Uh, then the bottom two, the left one is from northern Karnataka, and the right one is again from north of Bangalore. And all of these are different forms of savannas. Uh, so the presentation will have three sections. The first one will be about what these beautiful ecosystems are about, their ecology rather. The second will be the people and the wildlife which use these landscapes. So some information about them. And the third will be introducing everyone to the debates that surround these two aspects. So starting with what are savannas and what does research have to say about them? So there's a consensus amongst modern savanna ecologists that the Earth's savannas range from grasslands with scattered trees to densely tree-covered woodlands, typically along a gradient of increasing rainfall, with the defining characteristic being that the tree canopy is not closed and the understory is grassy. So this means that this typical photo of a savanna that we are used to seeing, where there's like golden colored grass, very few trees, large migration of wildebeest happening, is not the only form of savanna in the world. Uh, in fact, some savannas also look like this. So these are photographs from savannas of South Asia. And I'll just point out to those photos which are from India because people may have seen or been to these landscapes. So the first photo, there are numbers on each photo, so you can just refer to those. The first is, sorry, an acacia savanna from Gujarat. The second one is a broadleaf savanna from Mudumalai in southern India. The third one is again a different type of broadleaf savanna from Nagarjun Sagar Tiger Reserve, again in southeastern India. Then you can jump to the 10th one in the second panel. That's from Sariska. It's fine leaf savanna. And the 11th one is a pine savanna from Dehradun. So you can see that savannas can take different forms. and they are not necessarily only consisting of large swathes of grasses. So how are savannas formed? So, I mean, you don't need to really read this statement, but this is to show that savannas are formed by a combination of multiple factors. First is temperature, then second is water availability, third is the soil nutrients, and the other two are actually fire and grazing. So all of these factors have to come together in a certain combination to produce and sustain a savanna. If any of these balances tip, then the ecosystems are likely to modify into something else. So this is a map from a recent study where a group of scientists, they took information from African savannas, and using the same information, they tried to predict that in South Asia, where can savannas be present? So you can see that the darker parts are where the likelihood of a savanna being present is very high. And you can see that in India, it seems to be very widespread. So amongst all these different types of savannas, the ones that I'm particularly going to focus on are semi-arid savanna grasslands, or SSGs. So I'll be referring to them as SSGs in the talk. And again, another study, you can see the map of India to the right, and another study mapped the presence of these SSGs in India. And sorry, nothing is, I mean, you can't really read anything, but if you can just see at least the green parts in the map, those are where the SSGs are present. And you can see that they are widespread, but they are very much fragmented. So there are no large contiguous patches of savannas, SSGs. So how does the savanna in peninsular India look like? So these photos are again from different parts of peninsular India. But unfortunately, savannas currently rarely look so contiguous. So I'll show you a series of photographs as to how savannas look currently. 1 second. Yeah. Okay, so this photograph is of a herd of blackbuck, and in the background you can see a city. This is, I think, somewhere close to Sholapur in Maharashtra. And where the blackbuck herd is actually a patch of savanna. This photo is from northern Karnataka. Again, an SSG with a relatively high density of livestock. And this is a very regular picture you can see in those landscapes. This is from Osmanabad, again in Maharashtra. Windmills are a very common form. I mean, this photograph is actually a very commonly seen view in a lot of these SSGs. Another photograph showing how rapid infrastructure and urbanization is actually quite common in SSGs in peninsular India. Here you can see even power lines. You can see this mud road where you can see wheel marks. So that means vehicular movement is common. This is an interesting photo from the ravines of Rajasthan. Ravines are essentially river beds which are dry through certain parts of the year. You can see an Indian wolf in the foreground and a JCB at the back. And this is again a very common scene in ravines. Another photograph of an Indian wolf, and in the background a large house or a construction. This is from somewhere near Nagpur. So all of these pictures basically demonstrate or show that savannas are essentially shared landscapes. So in fact, again, one of the same research papers that I cited before, it shows that only 3 states in India, Madhya Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, and Maharashtra, have savanna patches which are larger than 10 square kilometers. So it is that highly fragmented, and it is heavily human use. Heavily human used, and essentially they are shared landscapes, and only 2.7% come under the protected area network in India. So now coming to the second part, looking at the biodiversity and the people who are present in these ecosystems or use these ecosystems. So I'll start with the floral diversity. Savannas are actually known to have a lot of endemic species of grasses especially. Endemic meaning that they are not found anywhere else in other ecosystems, and they are very peculiar to these SSGs. Some of them show very interesting adaptations. They have fire resistant or grazing resistant root systems. So that means that they can stay alive in the form of tubers. Even the seeds can stay alive and survive fires or grazing events. And when the conditions are favorable, they will germinate or send out shoots. So this is a very cool adaptation for some of these grasses to have in savannas. Secondly, we all have learned about C4 pathways in our biology classes in school, that grasses have this special mechanism to survive in very hot and arid environments, which is also a unique characteristic. And in fact, a lot of grasses that we consume, like maize and sugarcane and all are C4 grasses. So those are some special adaptations. Coming to the avian biodiversity, we all know of the Great Indian Bustard, one of the charismatic birds. That's to the right, and that's also a very amazing photograph, which had become popular. To the left on top is a lesser florican. These two are critically endangered and threatened birds from these landscapes. Then savannas are also wintering grounds for a lot of species. Below you can see on the left is a lapwing, sociable lapwing, and to the right is a pallid harrier. Both migrate from outside India to winter in these ecosystems. Coming to the ungulates, we have an antelope species like the blackbuck, we have a gazelle species like the chinkara. Both are very hardy, can survive with very minimal water, again adapted to these ecosystems. And
I have a question.
Yeah.
What was the subspecies of the lapwing that migrates to savanna along with florican? No, not florican, harrier.
Actually, I don't know the subspecies, but it's sociable lapwing.
Sociable lapwing. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So coming to the more commonly known group, which is that of carnivores, you have to the bottom left an Indian fox, a grassland specialist. To the top right, you have the desert fox, again a specialist. To the left on top is the striped hyena, and to the right below is the sloth bear. All of these use these savanna landscapes. But of course, I'm going to mostly focus on this particular species, which is the Indian peninsular grey wolf, which is known by Canis lupus palpus, its scientific name. So grey wolves are actually one of the most widespread and common carnivores in the world, especially in the northern hemisphere. And grey wolf is, there are other species of wolves, but grey wolf is the most common. In India, however, we have one known subspecies which inhabits the peninsular low-lying areas. And in the Himalayas, there's a debate as to how many subspecies are present. But Canis lupus chanco is definitely one of the subspecies of grey wolf present there. And that's the photograph in the middle. And the peninsular wolf looks like the photograph at the very bottom. Lanky, with very little hair and grayish brown coat. So yeah, largely I'll be focusing on this particular subspecies. And you can see from these photographs that wolves have actually been documented in so many variety of habitats. What is common amongst all of them is mostly they have vast open areas, but they are not exclusive to such areas. So for example, I'm sure all of you know about the Sundarban photograph to the bottom right, which came out 2 years back. That was something different that people were not expecting. Then more recently, the bottom left in Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary in southern India. Again, a dry forest, and it was quite surprising that they photographed a wolf there. Yeah, otherwise all photos are from largely from open systems, except the one to the top right. That's actually a pair of dholes, wild dogs, and there's a single lone wolf next to them. So that was also something quite exciting to document. That comes from Orissa, that photograph. Yeah. So, so yeah, I'll show some videos from northern Karnataka. And on the side, I'll sort of talk about the ecology of this subspecies. And sorry, all the videos are very shaky. So wolves are belong to the canid family. They are social animals. They are pack living animals, and pack sizes can range from 2 to 13. At least that's what's been documented in peninsular India. But pack sizes also change according to how much prey is present and how much, what is the season, what is the amount of water present. So a lot of factors affect the pack size. So this is in a maize field in North Karnataka. That's the one to the right was a male. And the other three, one was the female, and the other two were pups, which have now become, which had become adults. So this was another, in the same landscape, a camera trap video from a water hole. So that was a pack of 4. This was a pack of 6. The large fellow you can see is the male, is the female. The other 3 are subadult pups. The one which is coming is again a subadult pup, and the one which comes at the very end is the male. This was a pack of 6. Yeah, so I don't know whether you can hear, but this is a camera trap video of a mother. You can see that she's lactating also, and she's calling out to her pups. This is again from North Karnataka. So the litter sizes that have been documented with them also vary. So I'll show you the same pack again. Yeah, so in the same litter, there are actually at least 8 pups. And you can see all 8 in this video. Survival of these pups is, especially in human landscapes, is actually quite tough. So the pair might give birth to many, but we don't know how many reach adulthood because it depends on how many resources they get. There's some sort of retaliation as well. Okay, so what do wolves eat in these landscapes? We know that they consume wild prey, especially ungulates, large ungulates like blackbuck and chinkara. But we also know that they equally feed on livestock. So this whole belief that wolves have recently turned to livestock because there is very less wild prey is not necessarily true, because wolves are often seen to they might be adapted to actually taking livestock down. And you don't have to look at the numbers on the graph to the right, but the size of the bars will tell you that within protected area and outside protected area in Sholapur in Maharashtra, the wild prey and the domestic prey in wolf diet was almost the same. Interestingly, even vegetable matter is something that these carnivores consume. So to the left bottom, you can see two scat samples. To the left is one with a lot of watermelon seeds. And to the right is the one, it has grapes. So both came from nearby fields. So wolves also consume a lot of vegetable matter. And indeed, again in North Karnataka, we got a few photographic evidences of them consuming livestock. So these are 4 separate instances of wolves carrying livestock in their mouth, or parts of a livestock in their mouth. And how much do wolf packs move? That also has been documented, although these are the older studies, they still are quite important. So wolf packs in peninsular India have been known to inhabit 120 to 300 square kilometers of area. So to give sort of a comparison for people, say from West Bengal, it's as much as, say, the size of Kolkata. One wolf pack needs to cover that much. Needs in the sense it is found to cover that much territory, but they will not obviously cover the entire territory all the time. They will use parts of it, but they are capable of using such large areas. Another ability which is seen in a lot of other carnivores as well who survive in human use landscapes is the ability to read human movement and adjust their times accordingly. So this is again all different instances of one lactating female. So she had pups in the same area, and she used to use the same path to move in that rocky outcrop where her pups were. And it was all during the afternoon time. She used to move in the same direction. And indeed, on one of these days, to the right, the photograph from the in the night, you can see that she is actually coming back with something, some prey. So it could be that she was every day she was trying her luck with livestock herds, because there was no large wild prey in that area. And one of the days she came back and we happened to document it. So this is also an important ability that some carnivores have, that they can read landscapes, they can read time, and they can actually adjust their movements and behaviors according to where people are and when they are active. So then if we know that wolves are in human use landscapes, where exactly are they present? So these are 2 studies that I was a part of. I'll just quickly tell you about the findings. So this was from the western part of Maharashtra. You can see that this is the landscape. This is what it looks like. The yellow parts are all the dry habitat cover, mostly SSGs. And to the right is the distribution of populations. So this landscape, a population of people. Uh, and this landscape has everything, right from agricultural fields to savannas to metro cities to towns to villages, everything. And what we found was that the presence of wolves actually was across 64% of the landscape. So the dark areas on the right is where the chances of wolves being present are very high. So this does not mean that there are a lot of wolves there, but just the presence of wolves is high. So it was 64% of the landscape, and out of this whole geographic area, only 2.6% was under wildlife sanctuaries or national parks. Another study which I was a part of, called the Wild Canid India project, we mapped distributions of all canid species in India. And for the wolf, again, we found that it's very widespread in India, and it covers about 33% of its plausible range, which is to say that basically the wolf is an animal of a heterogeneous landscape. So I shall show another video uh, which sort of demonstrates everything together. So this is a male and a female. The male is carrying some livestock in its mouth. This is an agricultural field that they are in. And there are no crops currently, but they are moving in these agricultural fields. And as they go ahead, you will see that there are actually people in the background. So the male is the one feeding on the livestock, and the female is moving. Sorry for the bad video again. So there are people in the background. They're probably around 500 meters away. Yeah. So they were just passing through, and we happened to see them. All right. So now that we know that wolves are so closely tied with livestock, now I'll just introduce you to the communities that I have tried to interact with in these landscapes. These are mostly the pastoral groups, shepherding groups. And why them and not others? Because firstly, they are prone to losing livestock to carnivores, and secondly, grazing activities are often thought to be responsible for a lot of degradation in these areas. So my first finding, which is like a very short one, comes from this district in Karnataka called the Koppal district. These are the kind of landscapes which are common in Koppal: agricultural lands and rocky outcrops. So what I tried to do there is I interviewed shepherds for about 4 to 6 months, and I tried to track what are the reasons for them to lose their livestock, not just due to carnivores, but all reasons. What I found was, out of 204 instances that I recorded, or they reported rather, only 19 were those of depredation by either of the carnivores present there, and all others were due to livestock diseases, which is to say that it basically formed a very low proportion of their loss. Now, whether this is due to fewer number of carnivores or whether this is due to some other reasons, we don't know. But the result is that they were a small proportion of all the losses. Another small finding, which was common to both Maharashtra and Karnataka, was particularly very interesting, is that wolves were present in folk stories of some of these shepherding communities. So some of them refer to it as their brother or their uncle, and they believe that although these stories are not very common anymore, but I think they're still relevant to be documented. So they believe that if the wolf comes and takes a few livestock, it deserves that share, and that's how the herd of livestock is blessed. So this was some of the stories that some people shared. And why was this important? Is because a lot of people believe that these stories and these beliefs are what allow people to accept presence of carnivores around them. All right, so coming to the last part of the presentation, debates around both savannas and human carnivore interactions. So savannas in India, although are unique ecosystems, they are not recognized as such. In fact, all of us have heard of the word wastelands. There's a wasteland atlas which India prepares every few years, and they actually map out areas which are not, which are degraded. They call it degraded, which are basically all of these savanna grasslands. So probably this is what even all of us thought when we saw a picture of a landscape like this, that, oh, this seems to be a degraded landscape. There is absolutely no green here. And this is exactly what India's administrators probably also think. But we know that savannas are very unique ecosystems. They have evolved way before humans started humans began cutting forests, and they are definitely not degraded forms of forest, but unique systems of their own, and adapted to fire and herbivory both. Uh, One of the classic examples of mismanagement of savannas is seen in Maharashtra. So these are these lines that you can see, and the small holes that you can see to the top left. These are all made to plant monocultures, especially of neem. And this is believed to basically give value to these landscapes because they are devoid of vegetation. And this is done using funds from afforestation schemes. So the irony is that the government receives funds from industrial projects which are proposed elsewhere, especially in forested areas. So the forest is cut there, and the compensatory afforestation activities are done on savannas. So that's the irony, because people do not recognize these as unique ecosystems. And this is very common in Maharashtra. Second issue is that of so-called clean energy. So solar farms are also very common in these landscapes. Since it is supposed to be clean energy, it is probably subsidized and it is encouraged by state governments. But the truth is that it takes over and modifies large parts of these SSGs. Third issue is about encouraging water heavy. So imagine a landscape like that on top, devoid of vegetation, and it's like an old formation. Now imagine replacing all of that with thick sugarcane fields. So not only do you change the entire habitat, but you get water from elsewhere and grow crops, make farmers more dependent on water drawn from elsewhere, and none of this encourages hardy crops which the farmers probably could have grown. And this is the case with Maharashtra and even northern parts of Karnataka, that the landscape totally changes. And another interesting thing is the suppression of fire and grazing. So the top photo is from Bandipur. So the recent fire which happened in Bandipur, there was a big uproar about it, that, oh my God, how can you let fire happen in a forest? But parts of Bandipur are actually open woodland savannas. And fire is very much a part of the system. Although what happened then was these very large uncontrolled fires, and that happened because fire was suppressed in the first place. And the picture below is of one of the communities, grazing communities. Again, grazing is thought to degrade grasslands, but the truth is that human mediated grazing was always again a part of the system. So we need to be careful as to what we are opposing, because sometimes they are very much naturalized in a landscape. Okay, so these are just one or two slides left. Um, okay, so now that we know that savannas are these complicated systems with a lot of people and wildlife in the same place, I'd like to show this particular example, which was of a very unfortunate failure by the state government and the forest department. So it was about the story is about the Great Indian Bustard Sanctuary in Maharashtra, and that covered around 7 taluks in one of the districts called Sholapur, and this was I think declared in 1970s, and this entire region which you can see in that big map, the whole border actually consisted of the wildlife sanctuary, and 94% of it was private lands, and there were restrictions placed on people's transactions of these lands overnight, and there was a lot of uproar because for people, they could see these boards and posters of these GIBs coming up everywhere. It was a bird in their backyard, and suddenly it had become very special to everyone. And there were crores of rupees being poured in for its protection, and there were their rights of the land were curtailed for this bird. So there were a lot of demonstrations and protests, and this became like a big conflict. And currently, we have no bustards left in Maharashtra, and they also had to reconstitute the boundaries of the sanctuary because of the protests and the opposition. So, from almost 9,000 square kilometers, which was declared first, now it stands at 366 square kilometers. So this, and we have lost the bustard as well. So none of this actually was planned well, and in savanna systems, you just cannot have protected areas and expect them to expect people to stop using them in particular ways. So coming back to the wool, uh, in northern America and in some countries in Europe, wolves are also a symbol of conflict, just like the bustard in Sholapur. And people have faced a lot of problems rehabilitating wolves because some communities in those countries do not like wolves being present in their country. Uh, and wolves are also symbols of wilderness and oppression for a lot of people. So their conservation has not been easy. But in India, wolves are yet not symbols of any kind of unfair behavior by the authorities, or it's not as institutionalized as yet. Um, so the dilemma that all of us have is whether to intervene in people's backyards and determine what kind of relations they should have with carnivores, or do you let that be? Do you let them be and you know have minimum intervention in these landscapes? So that's a very big dilemma that a lot of uh, conservationists and NGOs and researchers have. So this is my last slide, and these are basically two scenes that I had witnessed. The one on top is shared by my colleague. It's from sorry, the Bunny grasslands in Gujarat. So that's a nilgai, and it is to hang around with the buffalo herds. And it was as good as one of the buffaloes, is what the story goes. And below is also a herd of sheep. And in North Karnataka, I noticed a few times that when I went to interview shepherds, there used to be this black buck fawn sitting somewhere in the herd with a rope around its neck. And the shepherds treated it exactly like livestock. So it's a Schedule 1 species for us, but for them it was probably something that they can uh, take around grazing with the livestock. So as a researcher or as a conservation practitioner, should I be intervening in this or not? And that's something that I don't have an answer to. So I just like to leave everyone with this question. And yeah, with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining in again. And thanks for listening.
Thanks, Ira.
We have few questions on the chat window. Can you see the chat window? Yeah.
1 second. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think we can start with Shayan Banerjee. I think is the first question. Yeah. Can you see that? What is the present population status?
1 second.
Hmm.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, okay. So we don't really know how many wolves, peninsular wolves are present in India. There are some very old estimates, and those are also not based on any robust work. Uh, but at least 15 to 20 years back, uh, scientists predicted that there are about 2,000 wolves in India. But that's just not based on anything. So as far as one of our research work goes, we know where they are distributed, but we don't know how many wolves there are. And it is most probably that their populations have gone down drastically in the past few decades. Uh, and yeah, they're just present in some pockets, I guess. I hope that answers your question.
Anyone wants to talk to Ira? Ira, is it okay for you if they
Yeah,
talk to
sure.
you directly?
They can
Yeah.
just directly ask.
Yeah. So you can unmute whoever wants to talk and talk to Ira, and while Ira takes the other questions.
I did not understand one point that
Okay.
in encouraging water intensive crops such as sugar canes will damage the savanna. So, other
Right.
than excessive consumption of water by these crops, what are the other things, other damages caused by these fields to the savannas?
Well, firstly, there's a lot of borewell-based irrigation in a lot of these areas, and the borewells go really deep because the water table there is like that. So you're basically drawing out water from the ground and supplying it to crops. That's basically changing the whole water table, and that too in a landscape which is not meant to have such water intensive agriculture. But apart from that, what it does to the soil or what it does to the atmosphere, I mean, uh, I don't have much knowledge about that,
Okay.
but it definitely makes farmers more vulnerable to a lot of social and economic changes.
One thing question came to my mind, that in wolf packs, how is inbreeding prevented? Like in lions, the dominant male will drive out other males when they come of age. So, in what
Right.
ways is inbreeding prevented in wolf packs?
Right. So it is known that at least after, say, 2 years or so, individuals do disperse from the pack.
Okay.
But again, just no work absolutely on how far they go, uh, what are the packs that they mingle with, or in fact, I mean, we are hoping that from Maharashtra, some of WI's work shows that because they are collaring sub-adult, they are calling wolves with disperse. So we are hoping that that will give us some information, but we really don't know of how far they go, how they travel to other packs or interact with other packs.
So we need more research and documentation on wolves as of now in India.
Yes, definitely. Because that's what is going to give us information to be able to conserve the species better.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh, Ira, the
Yeah,
next
next.
question is, I think, from
Karthik.
yeah.
Yeah, because the above question is already answered, I think.
Mm.
What are interactions of wolves with other carnivores in that habitat? What type of grassland habitats do Asiatic lions inhabit? Do they share their habitats with wolves? Okay, so the first part of the question, interactions of wolves with other carnivores. Yeah, so that's interesting because wolves do share the same areas with a lot of other large carnivores, especially hyenas, leopards, sloth bears, at least in peninsular India. and also other smaller carnivores like jackals, foxes. So I guess functionally, in some areas, wolves are still top predators in grasslands at least, not by size or weight, but functionally. So they may drive out smaller carnivores, but I guess leopards or sloth bears might be able to drive wolves away. Because in some parts of the North Karnataka landscape, our camera trapping revealed that leopards and wolves rarely shared the same rocky outcrops or the same areas. So there was, I guess, some kind of spatial partitioning. So they definitely do partition time and space with other carnivores. And Asiatic lions, what type of grassland habitats do they inhabit? I'm sure parts of Gir are also these woodland savannas. So lions definitely inhabit woodland savannas in India. And do they share habitats with wolves? Yeah, I mean, we won't be surprised if there are wolves in that landscape, but I'm not sure whether it's been documented officially by anyone. But yeah, I'm sure they do share at least fringes of the forest with wolves. Uh, okay. So interaction between Indian wolves and dogs. So another interesting thing. Yes, so definitely there are parts of India where hybridization between wolves and dogs might have occurred. There is some level of evidence based on photographs uh, from Gujarat. But in Maharashtra and Karnataka, I don't know of any records, like officially documented records. But yes, they do definitely hang out together. So I have seen once or twice that a single wolf was roaming around with a dog in northern Karnataka. And also there are some photos from Himalaya of the other wolf subspecies roaming around with dogs. So they definitely interact. They feed on the same carcasses. They feed. They drink from the same water holes, and they also might hybridize. Mm, okay. Another question. Do shepherds perceive livestock depredation as conflict or damages? I guess certain shepherds, depending on the context, they do think of it as a negative interaction. For example, in my study site in northern Karnataka, there was an incident where 16 sheep died at the same time due to a ruckus created in the sheep pen in the night due to wolves. So that time, definitely the shepherd was really angry, and he wanted the department to do something. He wanted the panchayat to do something. But in the same landscape, other shepherds said that they think that it is okay if wolves take a few livestock in a year. So there's a range of interactions. So yes, some people do think of it as conflict, but some probably don't. Uh, All right. Another question. Has there been records of jackals crossing with feral dogs in India and also competing for space? Does Indian wolves face a similar pressure from such feral dogs? Yes, so jackals and feral dogs, definitely there's way more evidence for it, especially from West Bengal. Uh, there are a lot of photographs that we got as a part of our project. People contributed, and they were clearly hybrids between dogs and jackals. So yes, crossing definitely happens between them, and also jackals are way more uh, adaptable in terms of what landscapes they are present in. So they interact with dogs much more than wolves. Is our guess. Uh, yeah, Indian wolves face a similar pressure, yes, to a certain extent, like I said before. Mm. What role does the grey wolf do in the savanna ecosystem? Well, they do. Okay, if you remove humans from the equation, uh, they do control black buck populations. They do control chinkara populations. Probably they keep some smaller carnivores away. Uh, yeah, I guess these are the roles that they perform in in a savanna ecosystem. Mm.
Hi, Ira. This is Deep.
Hey, hi Deep.
Am I audible? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you are.
So I have another question. It's
Okay,
regarding the distribution of like the Indian Peninsular Wolf. So,
okay.
like we have seen from the distribution records,
Huh.
wolves tend our peninsular Indian wolf. It prefers a more semi-arid environment, right? A landscape which is semi-arid by in nature. But
Huh.
because
Yes.
it's been recorded in semi-arid savanna landscapes of West Bengal as well, where you have and Jharkhand, where you have
Yeah.
wolf populations, scattered
Yeah.
wolf populations. But
Yes.
what's very interesting is the same picture that you showed in your land in your slideshow of a
Right.
wolf inhabiting in Sundar like a mangrove forest, so which is
Right.
something out of context. So like obviously we know that felid species like leopards and also smaller cat species like jungle cats are very versatile in taking up niches in the
Right.
environment.
Yeah.
So but the Indian wolf is known for a particular land inhabiting a particular kind of landscape.
Right.
So in that sense, it's very interesting how a species which is adapted for a arid environment is coping up in a completely different landscape, which is a mangrove. So
Right.
what is your take on that? Like, is there a population or somehow there was an individual that was found there?
Yeah. So most people guessed that it was just an individual which was maybe dispersing or just moving across the landscape. Because as far as I know, wolf presence records are from the western part of West Bengal. Uh, so yeah, it definitely, okay, I shouldn't say definitely, but it was probably not a part of any population which is resident there. It was an individual passing through, probably. But I had heard that even a few years back, there was a record of wolves from the Sundarbans, and there was a photograph, and they were identified as jackals. Uh, so yeah, that was also surprising. But they are known to inhabit at least fringes of forests, dry forests. So they are not exclusive to open arid areas. They do use forested areas as well. Uh,
But it's more like the forests which even the Asiatic lions prefer, which you were saying, the
right.
woodland scrubby
Yeah.
forest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So because the 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 southern West Bengal, where
Huh.
mostly wolf presence is seen, is
Right.
basically something which is similar to the forest type that the Asiatic lion also inhabits, which is a woodland scrubby area. So
Right.
but
Yeah.
the thing is that Sundarban is something totally a bit outside the context. So
Right.
somewhere like even if the wolf is moving from from maybe that southern West Bengal to maybe
Hmm.
Jharkhand or Orissa,
Right.
but then taking a route through a mangrove is something a bit very it's very interesting, to be honest.
Yeah. It is definitely interesting. Uh, and I don't know. I mean, is it possible that people had kept it as a pet and then released it there? You never know. Uh, because yeah, there have been other records from peninsular India where shepherds got a wolf pup home uh, to sort of rear it and stuff like that. So yeah, we don't know, and it's very interesting. We should have followed up on what happened to the individual, but they're so elusive and very hard to track, very hard to identify, like individually identify. So yeah, I guess we're limited by all that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Uh, okay, there's a question from Rahul Datta. In the US, there has been attempts to reintroduce wolf species. In some cases, there has been breeding in captivity and then release in the wild. What efforts, if at all, there has been in the country to consider strengthening the species? Yeah, I'm assuming you're asking what efforts have been made in India. Uh, yeah, so I don't know of any active efforts by our government or the forest department or our environment ministry which is focused on wolves. That's the thing about this species, that it's so hard to conserve the same landscapes that it's present in. Conserve in the sense it's hard to protect these landscapes, and also it's not a charismatic species in India. There are no funds which are directed only at the species at any scale. Uh, Plus, in fact, just about 100 years back, they were declared as vermin by the British government and they were killed in thousands. Uh, so, yeah, I think, yeah, there are
So,
absolutely no efforts.
so this is Rahul. Sorry,
Yeah,
thanks
hi.
for the answer. So in the US, they had the similar problem in 1870s.
Right,
Starting 1870s, they started killing all the ranchers, the livestock. People who manage the livestock started killing wolves in large numbers, and hunting is a sport in this country.
right,
But then, and by 1920s, all of the wolf population has gone, including Yellowstone.
right,
So about 25 years back, they they captured about 14 wolves from Canada and reintroduced into Yellowstone National Park.
right,
And since then, the ecology has dramatically changed. The aspens have come back, the trees have come back, the beaver dams have. So because there was pressure because coyotes and elks and all of those, went out of control. And so I think there's an argument to be made that this again. So my question was, is there a is there a list of endangered species in India, and is um, or is there some policy support for species that are that are endangered, or this, because I know the tiger and elephants are fairly popular species and get a lot of attention.
right.
But
Yeah, with
what about
respect to species in these landscapes, I guess it's the Great Indian Bustard that has received a lot of attention. But yeah, mostly since, like I said, these habitats are highly used by people and it's very hard to place any restrictions. Uh, so, like the US, where there is such control, high control of wolf population, they decide which wolf to kill, which female to kill, how many pups to kill. It's that micromanaged. In India, we don't even know where wolves are. We don't know what's their number, right? And it's not in our legal system or even in our values to control wildlife populations to such an extent. So the wolf has always remained on the periphery of uh, the conservation scheme in terms of funding or any protection efforts. And I'm not sure whether that's a bad thing or a good thing, uh, because if it's an animal which is going to live in the backyards of a lot of people, and you place very high, you you direct a lot of resources for its protection. I don't know how successful all of that will be. So that's also another
Actually,
question.
the data shows wolves do not impact humans, and about only 0.2% or 0.3% of livestock is impacted. So we are working with, for example, ranchers here
Okay.
to build that symbiotic relationship. So I think, and there's a great video called "How Wolves Change Rivers." So I would encourage everyone
Right.
to
So
see them.
yeah, yeah, that is a great video. Although I have heard of the counter arguments as well by ecologists who say that
Okay.
actually wolves have not changed anything significantly. So we don't know actually what is true.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi, this is Deep once again.
Hey,
Just
hi.
to add on to it, could be because this the Indian wolf is not getting that much of a protection or interest as per a species. Might be because the population is not well determined, or it could that be a reason? Maybe the population or the number of species, like number of individuals, or maybe a density of the population is not understood. Is Could that be a reason? To be honest, I
Uh,
don't know. Like, I'm just
I don't think so, because see, even for the Great Indian Bustard, no one knew of its populations, but it still rose up the ranks and still got a lot of funds and efforts. I think at least the Indian administration knows of very few methods of uh, actually implementing conservation interventions. And the classic one is declaring spaces protected, and that they cannot do with wolves, because no wildlife sanctuary or national park, on an average at least, can cover even one or two pack home ranges. So it's like they don't have any tools to conserve, because they cannot work with people, they cannot work with shepherds, they're not trained for that. They are a policing force. So I don't think it matters whether they know how many wolves or what their populations are doing. I think they are just short of the kind of tools and the skills that they have to manage such a species. Okay, I guess I'll take the next question. My question is, what are threats for wolves in their habitats and their lifespan? Is any park in India a dedicated area for wolves? Uh, okay, so threats for wolves in their habitats is, at some level there is retaliatory hunting by some communities, but that's not common for all shepherds, because that's also a commonly held belief. But yes, that is a threat. Then hybridization with dogs is also assumed to be a threat. Then the simple, I mean, what I showed in the presentation, the dwindling of their habitats. They don't have enough spaces, safe spaces to move around. That's one of the threats. Um, and I guess even diseases. There are records of wolves contracting rabies from dogs. So that's probably also one of the threats. Their lifespan, I'm guessing in the wild, it's about what, 15 years, 15 to 20 years. Uh, and yeah, I wonder whether there are anyone's actually documented individuals uh, for those many years. So the guess is, yeah, 15 years or so. Um, there are parks in India which are dedicated for wolves, but they are extremely small. For example, the Melkote Wildlife Sanctuary in Karnataka. If I'm not wrong, it's I think 50 square kilometers, 50 or 70, which is nothing for even a single wolf pack. Uh, so even if they call it a wolf sanctuary, we really don't know how effective they are in uh, protecting or conserving wolves. Hmm. Okay. Uh, Characteristics of a wolf's cat that one can identify in field itself. Hmm. Okay, so all right, this is like this is where my poor natural history is going to come out. It's basically uh, close to. So you have seen dogs cat. Wolf's cat is generally very similar, of course, um, and what else? I guess generally carnivorous cat has hair. Uh, yeah, I mean, I mostly found wolf's cat just very close to dens, and that's how I knew that it was wolf's cat. But if you give me a dog's cat, like a large dog's cat and wolf's cat, and place it next to each other, and they have all consumed some prey, I don't know whether I'll be able to differentiate, honestly. But pug marks and all, yes. Generally, those are also the signs that you can use. Okay, there were only few livestock losses in your study area. So if you can shed some light on dietary patterns of wolves, since we know they do depend on livestock often, if I'm not wrong. Yes. So they definitely, especially in the North Karnataka landscape where there's such poor abundance of large wild prey, they definitely feed on livestock a lot. But I mean, I don't know whether this is true again, but the livestock density in Koppal district was around 100 livestock heads per square kilometers. And wolves say if a wolf pack of, on an average, 4 individuals needs to consume meat every 2 to 3 days, uh, there is so much livestock around which moves freely that every shepherd probably does not have to undergo too much loss if wolves are not preying in the, I mean, their predation is not just in one area. Then I guess that's why the livestock losses that we recorded were such few numbers, because there's high density of livestock and maybe very few wolves to begin with also. Uh, so yeah, I guess they consume livestock, maybe smaller mammals, vegetable matter. That's what I can guess. Uh, okay. Are there any conservation programs in India for grey wolves? No, nothing very big or official. Once in a while, like some local DFO might, uh, highlight wolves because they are predators in that landscape. But any dedicated conservation programs, not really. Nothing that I know of. Any research work done on wolves in Sasswad? Yes. So WII has been involved with that population of wolves. They do have some programs going on, and we are hoping that that will actually give a lot of insights into what these animals do in human landscapes. So that's the research work that I know of from Sasswad. Solapur and Ahmednagar, yes, that's from early 2000 that the collaring activities were done. But Sasswad recently there has been some research work done, but we don't know anything yet. Yeah, I guess there are no more questions, at least in the chat.
One question came to my mind.
Okay.
Uh, uh, are wolves very aggressive towards human beings or very intolerant, or they can exist? They rarely attack human beings if they come face to face. And if they are not so aggressive, then can there be any means of providing alternate source of employment to the communities staying close to the wolf range other than grazing livestock?
Uh, So, just like a lot of other large carnivores, wolves are very elusive. They ideally do not want to come in front of humans or uh, get challenged by them in any way. So, they generally escape from where humans are present. Um, so, yeah, I won't say aggressive, but yes, there have been records of wolves biting people when there's out of, say, defense,
Difference.
but any purposeful depredation events or anything like that is unheard of. And alternative livelihoods, I mean, I don't think there is any need to think about that because uh, clearly in these landscapes, losses due to wolves are not too much.
Okay.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, wolves are not such a big threat to their livelihoods. So yeah, I guess we don't have to think about those things.
Hey, Ira,
Yeah, yeah,
we are here. So it's quite interesting when you mentioned that there have been records of wolves, being with feral dogs.
right.
So I was wondering, as you know, there is this recent huge conservation issue with regards to how feral dogs have been proving continuously a threat to wildlife, right? So
Yes.
is there have been any records of such for wolves, where feral dogs have been proved to be a threat to wolves itself?
Yeah, so through diseases, definitely yes.
Distemper and all, is it?
Because yes, distemper, rabies, uh, and because they in these landscapes they definitely feed on the same prey carcasses,
Mm-hmm.
and they also move around in the same areas. So in our camera trapping exercises, the wolf would pass in the morning, and immediately in half an hour there used to be a few dogs going around. So they definitely interact a lot, and diseases, they're prone to contracting diseases. Direct threats in terms of say chasing or killing,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't know of instances, but I can imagine that a pack of dogs can easily chase a lone wolf, say,
Mm-hmm.
or a subadult wolf.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I guess those things might also happen.
And the other one is, what I've read from, in fact, everyone on the call. I would also like to mention, Ira would also like to mention, Ira and Arjun Srivastav has amazing articles written on their research. So you all please, Ira, if you can type out the topic of the articles that where to find, maybe people can, read it up. And
Right.
yeah, so the other thing is, Ira, which interesting is, like you said, that there are not many obviously dedicated protected areas for wolves, but
Right.
the way the wolves have coexisted with the shepherds and farmers around in the landscape where you have research, isn't
Right.
it true that rather than a boxed conservation, a participatory conservation is a better idea
Yeah,
for wolves?
definitely. Uh, because, yeah, the only answer to allowing this species to persist is for people in those landscapes to accept its presence. And it is, like you said, definitely through the acceptance of farmers and shepherds that there is any scope for wolves to have large populations in
Mm-hmm.
India. But yeah, I mean, engaging with people and such long-term work and research has not happened. Definitely,
Mm-hmm.
uh, yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else has any questions for Ira?
Ida, just carrying on from the previous question,
Uh-huh.
just one protected area which was designated for wolves, and then people were moved out, and then it was found that the wolves no longer occur in that protected area and they moved out with the shepherds. Was there something like this? I just seem to have heard it somewhere.
Uh, I don't know about any protected area, but people do say that it is possible that wolves track migratory shepherds. They actually follow these herds. So there are migratory shepherds which move across the Maharashtra Karnataka landscape. And again, we don't know whether wolves follow because Can they enter? Can they travel such long distances with a livestock herd without being killed or without uh, having access to? I mean, they are also used to certain landscapes. So can they move from, say, the plains to near the ghats? Can they move across forested areas just tracking livestock herds? Seems slightly far-fetched because livestock is always present, uh, even in the form of resident herds. So, yeah, I don't know of any protected area story, but people say that wolves might follow shepherds, at least in some parts of the landscape.
Hi, Ira, this is Deep.
Yeah,
Yeah. So just to ask in context to that livestock thing. So when obviously the cases are you were saying the cases are very rare where livestock the sheer amount of livestock that the people keep there. So the number of losses to wolves are very less.
right,
But then again, from whatever conflict issues involving livestock, which come into like which happen in India with carnivores.
right.
Uh, so how does the community take up this whole fact of wolves feasting on their livestock? Because essentially, if you take an example of why, like obviously because we are discussing about the gray wolf from North America as well, why gray wolf is not didn't get that much amount of conservation efforts previously, why it was wiped out by shepherds was because of only one threat, that the wolves are a big threat to the livestock. So what is the scenario in that context, what is the scenario in India, like how do people take up the fact that wolves are killing livestock or they're feasting on or dependent on their livestock?
Yeah, so
Like is it more like they're dependent on the compensation that they get so they don't revolt, or is it just part of their life that they know that it's a very little loss that they have? So what is their context in that situation?
so as far as my guess goes, in peninsular India, losses to diseases like livestock diseases are way higher than depredation. So I think shepherds do not face very high economic losses due to presence of predators. That's true for peninsular India, at least, partly. But say in the Himalayan landscapes, for example, there's research from Spiti Valley, which says that wolves are actually thought of as so the attitudes towards wolves are quite negative compared to say snow leopards or even dogs like feral dogs. So over there people seem to think of wolves very differently. That's also a different subspecies, but in the plains seems like diseases are a major cause of concern for shepherds and depredation is not. Uh, and hence, and if we have to compare the situation, say, to the US or Europe, uh, actually, wolves, the values that wolves hold there are influenced by the church as well, which is again not the case here. So, wolves mean very different things there, and which is not the case here. So, yeah, I mean, over there, retaliatory killing, and even currently, I mean, wolf populations are uh, controlled very highly in those countries. That's because they don't, I mean, their attitudes towards these predators is very different. And that's not the case here. So, uh, yeah, I guess it's different for shepherds here. They have larger concerns, you can say.
Ira,
Yeah.
would you like to mention to all about your and Arjun's Wild Candid Citizen Science Project?
Yeah, so I have actually put out not a link, but the name of the website
Yeah.
in the chat box. So, if possible, do check it out. And this was basically an initiative by a group of 5 of us, and it started in 2018. What we thought was all cane species in India are basically less charismatic and we don't know enough about them. The IUCN maps of their distributions were very outdated. So it started with the idea that we should have updated range maps for all of these species. And we started the citizen science portal on which people could contribute their sightings from the last 1 or 2 years. And we collected that data over 3 to 4 months. And then we actually have some maps put out on the website. And there's also a research paper which is published, which has these current maps. So that's a huge progress from these outdated IUCN maps. And I hope that we hope that it's of use to conservation interventions at some point. But the effort was to basically get canid species into the spotlight and these alternative habitats, non-forested habitats in the spotlight.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else has any questions for Ira? If not, we can wrap it off today. And Ira, if you can, message on the chat box your email ID where people
I'll do
might
that.
have questions later in mind and they can shoot it to
Sure.
you.
Yeah, feel free to drop an email. Yeah, I've put out my email address in the chat box.
Thank you
Sorry,
so
Ravi.
much. Pradeep, please, sorry.
Yeah, just one last thing.
Yeah.
It was in the middle. So essentially, it's it's connected to the livestock thing. Like you are saying, like people, it's not that worse that people associating wolf with threat. It's more for the Canis lupus chanco that this kind of behavior is seen where people are more negative to the species. But
Yeah.
then coming from my experience, so essentially it was a case that happened in Sitapur. I don't know if you remember from UP, where multiple children were killed by a canid. But then
Right.
again, the problem was the culprit were feral dogs, but the culprit was by the people and everything. Even a wolf was killed, mobbed by
Right.
and lynched by people. But it was technically a victim because the wolves were not attacking the children.
Right.
It was feral dogs. Then again, it's something of a similar thing where wolves are again demoniac. They are the they are made the villain of the
Right.
whole thing when they are not even a part of it.
Right.
So essentially, it's not the
Yeah.
same, to be honest. Like what is your take on that?
Yeah. So the child lifting instances, people guessed that, or maybe it was like uh, mob mentality that someone proposed that, oh, it must be a wolf, and then people cornered a particular individual and killed it. And this has also happened in southern India. Um, I forgot Pavagada. Pavagada is an area between Karnataka and Andhra where this had happened. There were rumors of child lifting by wolves, and then again there were orders issued to cull whichever wolf comes in people's way. This was in 1990s. Uh, so yeah, I guess this is wrong information. It is also possible that there was a wolf which had rabies and it went across biting kids because that's what happens to rabid animals. So that's also possible. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what happened because these are very old records. Um, and probably we also have like some carry forwarding of colonial ideas where there were wolves were declared vermin and asked to be culled. Maybe that's also still prevalent in some parts of India. So all of that culminated in killing of these.
Yeah, I completely agree. But essentially, it was later proved that in Sitapur the cause was feral dogs.
Dogs. Okay.
So yeah, later on it was proved. Yeah.
Oh, I
Yeah.
see.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think, Ira, would you agree that maybe many will agree that the whole image of wolves across the globe has been highly marred out by the Hollywood and the Bollywood movies, where they're always shown as the bloodthirsty, animal and turning into a, demon types.
Yeah,
E-
like a
even
big
even
bad
even
wolf.
the Aesop's fables, and even the
Right.
fables that we have been
Ah,
learning from
Yeah.
when we're child. I think there also the wolf is the demonic character. It's always given.
Yeah.
It's always
Red
represent
Riding
that
Hood,
way.
classic
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
story
Red
of
Riding
wolf.
Hood, yeah.
Yeah.
Reminds me.
Yeah. The wolf is always cunning in Western
Very
stories.
bloodthirsty and, like, yeah. So,
There's actually a very interesting paper on these two types of stories, one from the Western world and one from Mongolia, where wolves have been featured to be these brave animals which save people and have good causes in their hearts. So someone's compared these stories and said how wolves are seen very differently in different cultures. So yeah, that's
wonderful.
also some.
Anyone else who would like to have a few wrap-up questions, or we can wrap it off today? And anyone has any other thoughts later can email Ira. And it was such an amazing talk, Ira. Thank you so much. And
Hello,
yeah, yeah,
hello,
yeah. Please.
hello. Hi, I'm Ardhendu. I'm from Coach Behar.
Yeah, hi.
I have a question.
Yeah.
As my question is, what is the total number of wolf? What is the population of total number of wolf in India? Total population.
Yeah, so some other folks also were wondering about the same thing, and we don't have any numbers. We just know where they are distributed, but we don't have any numbers currently. There were some older estimates about 15 years back, which said there are 2,000 wolves in India, but we don't know whether that's true or
Only,
not. Yes, but we don't know whether that's true or
and
not.
this is also decreasing nowadays.
Probably yes. They are
The,
quite present in India, so it might be even lesser than 2,000.
So, this is highly endangered.
Yes, it is, but unfortunately there is no administrative attention or conservation attention on it.
Is there any breeding program in any part of India and any zoo or anywhere else?
Not for Indian wolves. I mean, zoos do have wolves, and once in a while we hear of a pair breeding in a zoo. But we do not, I mean, at least in India, uh, there are no efforts for any species to breed them in captivity and then release in the wild. So that's not even
Oh,
possible for wolves.
I think only the
So let me
GIB.
so
GIB is the only one where we are doing the captive breeding and release
Right,
program.
and
Yeah, and
vultures as well.
vultures also. Yeah,
Yeah.
vultures. Did we do that for Gharial also, Ira?
Oh yeah,
Champa?
yes,
Gharial, yeah, I
in
think.
Madras Cocktail.
Yes.
so this is Rahul again. So
Yeah.
what are the top ideas? What can we do to restore this beautiful species in India? What's the solution? What's the solution framework? I mean, there are things that have worked other places. We can
Right,
copy paste some of that, but that may not work.
right. So I guess there have to be very site-specific solutions to work with people. Firstly, monitor their populations in the landscapes where they are present, and make sure that there are no instances of poisoning, or make sure that people are not facing livestock losses due to them. And if they are, then assist them in all ways possible, uh, allowing these savanna grasslands to remain as they are. That is also very important, which definitely our current government does. I mean, that's not their priority at all. Then I guess working with forest departments to make them more equipped to monitor wolves and highlight the importance of these ecosystems, the whole biodiversity in these ecosystems.
I
All
mean,
together,
the thing with wolves is that the forest department cannot manage them because their territory is so huge. They usually
right?
are.
But yeah, I mean, although they cannot manage them actively, at least some people don't even have an idea that there are wolves in their jurisdiction.
Mhm.
So yeah, I, I guess engaging with these people uh, will help to a certain extent.
Okay. Well, this is a subject that I'm passionate about, so I'm really keen to see if we can do
Right.
something to bring back the wolves.
Yeah, I mean that it would be nice if there's any successful intervention in the future. I guess there are no more questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Ira. Thanks.
Thank
It's
you.
such a lovely talk, and especially such a lovely animal. And I
Yeah,
wish we all wish such great success to you on
thank you,
saving
Dee.
these canids. And maybe all of us on this call till now can be part of the wildcanids.net, where they are doing the
Yeah,
citizen science, which will be really helpful for, we can all contribute to saving this species, in fact.
yeah. Thank you to everyone in Heal for organizing this talk.
Thank you so much, and a very good night. Just wanted to wrap up and say that tomorrow we have a woman herpetologist, which is a very rare breed, I would say. And she's Dalia Ghosthosidar, who is going to join us tomorrow for her talk on venomous snakes. And after that, we have Sweta. I'm not sure whether Sweta is around. Okay, Sweta, who is going to talk about her work with leopards in Himachal Pradesh. So we have very exciting lineup coming up soon, and apologies again to our Calcutta audience that you all could not tune in because of the calamity that has happened. But we will put this recording live on YouTube as and share on pages. So I hope all of you can watch and tune into Ira. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ira. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Bye. Take care. Bye.
Bye.